Late-stage Theodore Roethke shows the effects of a lifetime of mental health challenges and introspection, quite frankly. The poetic activity of his lifetime was about digging deep, deep, deep into his soul and trying to come up with some sense of meaning, some expression of control within his general perception of a chaotic universe. And late in the game, when he comes out with his masterful work, really the last one of his lifetime, the Far Field, a brilliant collection that is much more metaphysical than his earlier work, much more abstract, where he's really grappling with some themes and ideas in a way that is completely dislocated from the more recognizable imagery and concrete objective correlatives that he had worked with in the past. And probably his most iconic poem of that collection is called "In a Dark Time," which has a great musicality to it, of tone and a kind of incantatory majesty as it delves into his deepest psychology, quite frankly, his deepest psychoses. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. I hear my echo in the echoing wood, a lord of nature weeping to a tree. I live between the heron and the wren, beasts of the hill and serpents of the den. What's madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? The day's on fire. I know the purity of pure despair. My shadow pinned against a sweating wall. That place among the rocks. Is it a cave or a winding path? The edge is what I have. A steady storm of correspondences, a night flowing with birds, a ragged moon, and in broad day the midnight come again. A man goes far to find out what he is. Death of the self in a long, tearless night. All natural slapes blazing in unnatural light. Dark, dark my light, and darker my desire. My soul, like some heat-maddened summer fly, keeps buzzing at the sill. Which eye is I? A fallen man, I climb out of my fear. The mind enters itself, and God the mind, and one is one, free in the tearing wind. Now, this is very clearly very abstract and, yeah, very dark. And the title itself, "In a Dark Time," suggests that this is him going through one of his periods of psychological crisis, of mental health breakdown, which he did have periodically throughout his life, and that was the great struggle of his life. And you can see in some of this imagery a kind of indeterminate grasping at shadows, at something so unknowable and yet so compelling, that he is constantly diving in to find it, into the darkness, further into the darkness. And the darkness itself becomes a kind of home for him. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. So you acclimate to the dark, and it begins to show you aspects of reality that perhaps are not visible in the ordinary light of day, the ordinary light of mental health, or just normal existence. I meet my shadow in the deepening shade. So here he's opposing himself. He is working within that duality. I meet my shadow. So he is recognizing himself as different from his shadow. And it is his shadow that is somehow an intermediary, perhaps, between him and the deepening shade. And so his shadow, the dual part of his identity, is drawing him deeper into this darkness. And then all of this great mood stuff going on. I hear my echo, something different than a shadow again, but still a duality. I hear my echo in the echoing wood, a lord of nature weeping to a tree. The tree recalls all of his greenhouse stuff, all of the nature imagery of his earlier work. And here he is perhaps showing himself a lord of nature, somebody who once controlled nature, helped guide nature in working in his greenhouses, in wild nature, in unkempt nature now, and is somehow impotent, a lord of nature weeping to a tree. Perhaps a sense of failure that he has not really done anything that matters. I live between the heron and the wren, beasts of the hill and serpents of the den. These cute little couplets that end every stanza. The rhyme scheme itself is fairly straightforward. It's an A B C A D D rhyme scheme, each stanza, but you do get some of his characteristic irregularities in there. Obviously, down in the last stanza, you get a little irregularity. It is A B B, A maybe C, depending if you can rhyme desire and fear, and maybe his accent living up in Washington has changed a little bit, and he's sort of melding that, like, okay, that's sort of working, fear and desire, but fly and I, that is a twist in the expectation. And technically even that last couplet, and God the mind free in the tearing wind, mind and wind, not really a rhyme, but I think that's the point. It is his irregularity that he is always working with, and you can see that in a couple of them, a couple of the lines throughout. But the imagery is all rather jagged. And it is not really adding up to anything. It is very suggestive imagery. It is very compelling imagery, certainly. But perhaps taking from some of his contemporaries, I'm thinking mainly like a Charles Olson, maybe, this very difficult imagistic approach to poetry that does not try and resolve itself, does not try and sand down the edges at all, or make them interlock at all. And it is just undigested chunks of imagery getting offered up out of his deepest psychosis that is something to struggle with, something to grapple with an expectation, I assume, that you can either dismiss it as nonsensical or struggle with it eternally without reaching a conclusion, or yet again, perhaps follow that imagery and that as a little trail of breadcrumbs into your own dark places, into your own darkness. And in there, maybe your eye as well will begin to see. There's so much going on in this poem that is intriguing, that is seductive. It is a remarkably seductive poem. It lulls you into its rhythm and its peculiarities of the imagery and the lilting sound. What's madness but nobility of soul at odds with circumstance? A rhetorical question at the beginning of a stanza. I don't know. Maybe we think about that for a little while, and I'll get back to you. And in the process, I get drawn into this shadow realm. The day's on fire. I don't know what that means. I know the purity of pure despair. Well, yeah, okay. He has had some hard times. My shadow pinned against his sweating wall. His shadow comes back, and that sweating wall, I wonder what that is. That place among the rocks, is it a cave or a winding path? Is it like a dead end in your own darkness, or is it just something that wanders through the darkness, perhaps leading somewhere, perhaps not? The edge is what I have. What edge? Is it the edge of that path? Is it the edge of that cave? Is it the edge of your own sanity, of your own psychological awareness? A steady storm of correspondences. Correspondences are essentially echoes, one to the other, literally echoes or not. The night flowing with birds, a ragged moon, and in broad day, the midnight come again. These contrasts, these opposites, these dualities that are struggling it out in his consciousness. A man goes far to find out what he is. Death of the self in a long, tearless night, all natural shapes blazing, unnatural light. It's a hellscape. It's an image of a very tortured existence, one that offers very little in the way of encouragement. Dark, dark my light, and darker my desire, desiring knowledge. My soul, like some heat-maddened summer fly, interesting simile there, keeps buzzing at the sill, which I is I. Here you can see the poetic voice has turned in on itself, which I is I, that struggle with duality, that struggle with identity, which I is I. Is any I what he sees as an opposite, as a correspondence, an echo, a shadow? All of that is somehow other, but at the same time, he is struggling to make it himself, to resolve those differences, to resolve those contrasts and those oppositions. A fallen man, I climb out of my fear. So there is some progress here. He is getting somewhere. Exactly where, we don't know. But the mind enters itself, and God the mind, and one is one, free in the tearing wind. Tearing or tearing could be either way. But it is ending on a kind of religious note. It is ending with an image of God, and an image of oneness, of wholeness, of resolution of this split nature, this duality. And maybe the poem is settling on a conclusion that only by pursuing into the darkness, by pursuing yourself and your contrasts and your oppositions and your fears and perhaps your desires into that darkness, maybe that's the only way. Now, there is no, in this battle, you see a lot of oppositions and a lot of confrontations with opposites, and maybe that is a victory of sorts. But there's really no sense of a cause and effect resolution here. There's really no sense that and I confronted my darkness, and then at the end, I was one with God. That's really not the case here. It's much more mysterious. It's much more dark and uncertain. And because of that, you have to wonder that at this stage, when he is in a dark time, when he is in a moment of psychological crisis, maybe his perceptions aren't accurate. Maybe they can't be trusted. And so when he declares this kind of victory at the end, maybe it's just his own impaired vision in that darkness. So he's not seeing something that is there in the darkness that is aided by the darkness. He's just seeing the darkness, which clouds his ability to see anything accurately.